Welcome to our deep dive into Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. It's a book that still has the power to make us kind of rethink everything we think we know about morality and how we see the world, even though it was written over a century ago.
Nietzsche, he really wanted to challenge conventional wisdom, especially like the philosophical ideas that were popular during his time.
So for those of us who maybe aren't philosophy experts, where do we even begin with this book? What's the big idea here?
Well, one of Nietzsche's main targets was this whole idea of truth as something absolute and unchanging. Like he was really skeptical of these grand, sweeping philosophical systems that claim to have all the answers. He even questioned these like foundational beliefs that philosophers like Kant considered essential for human thought. Things like what are known as synthetic judgments a priori.
Yeah.
These are basically judgments that we just kind of assume are true based on how we experience the world, even though we can't really prove them.
Okay, so could you give us like a relatable example of what you mean? How do these judgments actually play out in our lives?
Okay, so think about the idea that the sun will rise tomorrow. I mean, we can't really know that for sure, but we base our whole lives around this assumption. Right. So Nietzsche argued that these kinds of beliefs, while maybe not objectively true in some like ultimate sense, they're necessary for us to function. They give us a framework for understanding the world and making decisions. But the key takeaway here is that these frameworks are human creations, not divine truths.
That's a pretty radical idea, right? It kind of shifts the ground beneath our feet in terms of what we consider true.
Exactly. And from this questioning of truth, Nietzsche goes even further and starts to deconstruct something we just take for granted, the idea of the self.
Wait, so he's questioning whether I even exist.
Well, not quite in those terms. What he's really critiquing is this idea of the ego as this solid, fixed entity. He suggests that the one who thinks the one experiencing the world might not be this unified, stable Eirik that we imagine.
So it's more about challenging the assumptions we have about who we are and how we experience the world.
Yeah. And this ties into one of his most famous concepts, the will to power. Now, when we hear power, we often think of, domination or control over others. But for Nietzsche, it's much more nuanced than that.
So what did he mean by will to power if it wasn't about traditional power dynamics?
For Nietzsche, it's this fundamental drive, this energy that like permeates all living things. It's this urge to grow, to overcome, to expand your influence, not necessarily over others, but over yourself and over your circumstances. He was really interested in the difference between what he called strong and weak wills, suggesting that it's not just about having free will, but about the strength of our will to actually act, to shape our lives and, become who we are.
So it's almost like a life force, this striving to become more than we currently are.
Yeah, and this concept of striving is crucial to understanding Nietzsche's idea of the free spirit. He saw the free spirit as someone who can think independently, free from the constraints of societal norms and, conventional morality. They create their own values based on a deep self-understanding and a willingness to question everything.
That sounds incredibly liberating, but also daunting. Doesn't that kind of radical individualism lead to chaos if everyone's just creating their own rules?
It's a valid question, and Nietzsche himself recognized the potential dangers of this kind of freedom. It's not a path for everyone, and it certainly requires a strong sense of self-awareness and responsibility.
So how do we navigate this tension between individual freedom and the need for some kind of shared values or moral framework?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. Nietzsche believed that much of what we consider morality is actually a product of power dynamics and historical forces. He famously contrasted master morality and slave morality.
Okay, break those down for us. What are these different moralities and how do they play out in the world?
So master morality, as Nietzsche saw it, is the morality of the strong, the noble, the creators. It values strength, courage, and self-affirmation. Slave morality, on the other hand, is the morality of the weak, the resentful, the followers. It emphasizes things like humility, compassion, and self-denial.
So is he saying that one is inherently better than the other?
Not necessarily. Nietzsche wasn't advocating for some kind of ruthless, power-hungry approach to life. What he was trying to do was expose the underlying motivations behind different moral systems. He believed that slave morality, which he saw as dominant in Western culture, especially through the influence of Christianity, had actually weakened humanity by promoting a kind of herd mentality and a fear of true individual greatness.
That's a pretty bold claim. How does this critique of Christianity fit into his overall philosophy?
Well, for Nietzsche, Christianity was like the ultimate expression of slave morality. He saw it as a religion that glorified suffering, weakness, and resentment, ultimately turning people away from embracing their full potential and celebrating life in all its complexity.
That's certainly a provocative perspective, and I'm sure it ruffled some feathers in his time. But how can we apply this idea of master and slave morality to our own lives? It seems a bit abstract and historical.
Think about the values we often praise in society: humility, selflessness, putting others first. These are all hallmarks of what Nietzsche called slave morality. He wasn't saying these are bad qualities in themselves, but he was questioning why they're often seen as inherently superior to qualities like ambition, assertiveness, or the pursuit of personal excellence.
So it's more about recognizing the hidden power dynamics at play in the way we judge ourselves and others.
Exactly. Nietzsche wanted us to be aware of these influences and to critically examine the values that we've been taught to accept without question.
This is all connecting back to his idea of perspectivism, right? The idea that there's no single objective truth, but rather multiple perspectives shaped by individual experiences and power dynamics.
Precisely. Nietzsche believed that even our most cherished moral beliefs are not timeless and universal, but rather products of our history, our culture, and our individual perspectives.
So how do we even begin to navigate this complex moral landscape? It seems like we're constantly bombarded with conflicting values and ideologies.
That's where the concept of the free spirit comes back into play. For Nietzsche, the free spirit is someone who can detach themselves from these predetermined moral frameworks and critically evaluate different perspectives. It's not about rejecting morality altogether, but about creating one's own values based on self-knowledge and a deep understanding of the world.
So it's a process of constant self-reflection and questioning rather than blindly accepting what we've been told.
Exactly. And this leads us to another important aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy, his critique of what he called the illusion of simplicity. He believed that humans have a tendency to simplify complex realities in order to make them more manageable. We create narratives and explanations that give us a sense of order and control.
So you're saying that our desire for easy answers can actually hinder our understanding of the world?
Absolutely. Nietzsche argued that this simplification, while beneficial for survival, can also limit our intellectual and personal growth. It prevents us from seeing the nuances and contradictions that are inherent in life. He encouraged us to embrace the complexity of things, to question those easy answers, and to constantly push the boundaries of our understanding.
It seems like he's calling for a radical shift in how we approach not just morality, but knowledge and understanding in general.
That's a great way to put it. He wasn't content with surface-level explanations. He wanted to dig deeper to uncover the hidden motivations and power dynamics that shape our perceptions and our values.
This is a lot to unpack, and I'm sure our listeners are starting to see why Nietzsche is considered such a challenging and influential thinker.
He's definitely not for the faint of heart, but for those willing to engage with his ideas, he offers a really profound and thought-provoking perspective on what it means to be human in a world where traditional values and certainties are constantly being questioned.
And it leads us to a question that's been kind of lingering throughout our discussion. What is the ultimate message of Beyond Good and Evil? What does it mean to go beyond good and evil?
Well, it's not about rejecting morality completely. It's more about recognizing that those traditional fixed categories of good and evil, they're often not enough to really capture how complex human experience can be. For Nietzsche, going beyond good and evil means creating your own values based on really understanding yourself and being willing to question, pretty much everything.
So it's about taking responsibility for shaping our own moral code instead of just blindly accepting the one we've been given.
Yeah, and it's about recognizing that what might be good for one person or in one situation might be evil for someone else or in a different situation. Nietzsche believed that true morality comes from a place of strength, self-awareness, and a deep understanding of what it means to be human.
This idea of strength seems really central to Nietzsche's philosophy.
Oh, absolutely. For Nietzsche, strength wasn't about physical dominance or power over others. It was about intellectual honesty, courage in the face of difficult truths, and the will to create something new and meaningful in the world.
So connecting all of this back to Beyond Good and Evil, what can our listener take away from this book? How can these ideas actually be applied to their own lives?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is this call to self-reflection. Nietzsche wants us to question everything we think we know about ourselves, our values, the world around us. He's asking us to become more conscious, more aware, and to live more deliberately.
It's almost like he's giving us permission to break free from those mental and moral constraints that we put on ourselves.
Exactly. He's challenging us to become free spirits, to think for ourselves, create our own values, and embrace the full complexity of life.
That's a powerful message. It's both liberating and a little bit intimidating, isn't it?
It definitely can be. But I think Nietzsche would argue that it's through this kind of self-examination, there's the willingness to confront those uncomfortable truths that we can truly grow and become who we're meant to be.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Beyond Good and Evil,
Yeah.
what's the one question you would leave our listener with? What's that lasting thought that you hope they'll take away from our discussion?
I think the most important question we can ask ourselves based on Nietzsche's philosophy is this. What are the beliefs and values that I haven't really examined? The ones that are shaping my life right now? And are they really serving me well?
That's a great question to end on. It's a good reminder that the journey of self-discovery is always ongoing, and that true freedom comes from understanding and shaping those forces that influence our thoughts and actions.
Exactly. And it's a process that requires courage, intellectual honesty, and a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones.
Well, thank you for taking the time to guide us through this deep dive into Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. It's been a challenging but really insightful exploration into some of the most fundamental questions we all face as human beings.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, thank you so much for joining us. We hope this has been intellectually stimulating and maybe even a little bit life-changing. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep pushing beyond those comfortable boundaries.